Hello, Arnie.
Hi, how are you, Rabbi?
I'm doing well, thanks, Arnie. What
Very
brings
good.
you here tonight?
I'm going to talk about sacred fragments.
Arnie, it would be my delight if you would be willing to be our concluding speaker for our summer speaker series and tell us about sacred fragments.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Cantor. Thank you, people on Zoom and people here in the room as well. It's my pleasure to talk a little bit about sacred fragments. I'm going to be spending a few moments talking about a few, and then I want to reflect on one particular one that kind of intrigues me a little bit. There's been people in the course of the summer that have mentioned two that kind of are generative, related to kind of the way we think about our place in the world and society, maybe even political, and that would be obviously B'Tselem Elohim, that everyone is created in God's image, and therefore everyone ultimately is worthy because we're all, despite our differences or because of our differences, we all have an element of the divine within us. The other part that goes along with that is because we were slaves in Egypt, we have this tremendous commitment and understanding about suffering and about those people who are oppressed. And those two are kind of undergird me and my hunches, many other people in this congregation. I wanted to speak about one other one before I get to the one that kind of really has got me these days, which is the notion that with all due respect to all the other religious traditions in our community and the broader community in the world, Judaism operates with the notion that the days of the Messiah are yet to come, that we have not yet experienced it. And what that does is it gives us a mindset, if you will, that we are always geared to this notion that there will be such a thing as redemption. That's why the slaves were freed, because we are the models that even those who were oppressed will eventually someday be freed. But for us, that's always somewhere out there. It's always in the future. And that's a distinguishing feature, frankly, between us and, let's say, another remarkable Western tradition, religious tradition of Christianity or of Islam. We always have that sense that there's something out there. There's something in front of us. That's why we're so geared to the future. And frankly, that's why we're so obsessed with children. That's why we're so obsessed with children, because children are our vehicle to be able to get there. We understand, like Moses, that, and even the people of Israel, we won't see the promised land in our lifetime, but we understand we generate it through our children. That's why people are so nuts about taking care of their children. That's why they're so nuts about the education of their children, because at its very core, Judaism is geared to the notion that that continuity, that transmission, is fundamental to redemption. And so my work in Jewish education, Laurel's work in Jewish education, in some ways operates with that sort of propulsion, that sort of animation, that sort of generation. This week's portion, Parshat Nitzavim, is really quite an interesting one. It comes almost at the very end of the Torah. And in its very beginning, Moses says, look, everyone's here today. You're all here today. If you're rich, if you're poor, if you're old, if you're young, if you're big, if you're small, everyone's here today. And you know what? What we're going to talk about today doesn't only apply to the people who are here, it applies to even people who aren't here and generations to come. Atem nitzavim kulchem hayom. You're standing here, witness today, every one of you. And what is it that they're all witness to? They're all witness to a renewal of the covenant. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs has a very interesting take on this. He goes, there's been at least 3 other covenants prior to this portion. There's first the covenant with Noah. And with Noah, God says, look, I'll make a covenant with you. The word brit is in there. And it's understood kind of a covenant with humanity. There are 7 laws there. And the foremost among them is don't shed the blood of another human being. Immediately or shortly thereafter in the Torah, there's the covenant with Abraham, in which God says to Abraham, look, I'm going to make you a great and a mighty nation. Other nations will look to you. You yourself have to circumcise yourself. That's a certain amount of suffering that's there. And you must bring up your children in a certain way. The third covenant is a covenant with Bnei Israel, with the children of Israel, at Mount Sinai. And at Mount Sinai, God says again, look, I have today these laws to give you. And the people of Israel say, yeah, we'll do whatever you say, we're going to do. And that becomes the third and in some ways the most critical covenant, but until this week. In this week, the covenant is flipped. You see, every other covenant up to this point, God is saying, look, I'm going to make you a deal. And the person, whether it's Noah or Abraham, and the people of Israel say, you're making the deal with me. How can I refuse? What Moses says this week, that's not how it's going to work. We're going to reaffirm. We're going to renew our covenant. And what Sachs says is if you look at it, each of the covenants gains in maturation. What's asked of Noah is less than what's asked of Abraham. What's asked of Abraham is less than what's asked of a whole nation. And there's increasing responsibility, increased opportunity, until what Sachs suggests is this is the culmination. We're no longer, as Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, just children, accepting from the great power from the parent. It's now the people of Israel saying it's no longer in heaven that this will come from, it comes from us. And that renewal of the covenant, Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Sachs says, is an indication of what he calls the end of childhood of the people of Israel and the beginning of their adulthood. When people are able to make covenants, renew their vows, they are in some ways enacting what it means to be mature in the world. So you can imagine my surprise when this week, I don't know, did anyone see this? Was Newton the only paper that got this? King Richard's Fair. Does this mean anything to anybody? So what I'm going to say now is that it's not intended to be snide or sarcastic. It just is going to show how little I understand of the world around me. I had no idea such things went on. How long has this been going on, as they say? I had no idea. I had no idea, forever. And it's like, look at this, you have no idea. Look at the events that go on here, that this is sort of thing. And as my grandmother, she's the rest of us would say, from this they make a living. I had no idea, none. So what caught my attention, you would think what catch my attention is this Saturday, the 20th anniversary of the great tragedy of September 11th, is going to be the beginning of weekend 2, the famed cleavage contest at King Richard's Fair. That's on Saturday, not to be outdone by Sunday, the Beer Olympics. That's what goes on, that's what they're doing. But it's weekend 3 that caught my attention. Weekend 3 is called Romance in the Fair, Vow Renewal Ceremony. The vow renewal ceremony is at King Richard's Fair, so you get your tickets early. But listen to the language that they state. Grab someone special, a glass of champagne, and enjoy a swing on our new Griffin ride. So that's how they bill it. The implication, of course, is that you're standing around and you see someone special. You grab them and you say, let's renew our vow. It boggles the imagination that such things happen, particularly when you contrast it to the notion that what Sachs says is renewing vow. That's like the most sacred thing you could do. This is like the kind of the culmination, the maturation of the whole people of Israel. They've got a different take. Grab someone special, get something to drink, go on a ride. That's how you renew the vow. It reminded me actually that for a number of years, although she doesn't remember it, I would say to Laurel, you know what? Let's renew our vows. Let's do that. We've been married, God willing, actually next week. This coming on Thursday, it will be 48 years of wedded bliss. 48 years of wedded bliss. And I would say to her from the time, you know what, we should renew our vows. And she would say, sit down, take a nap, you're worn out, you're laid out. Maybe it's indigestion. And I would say, Laurel, I'm asking you a question. The notion of renewing vows goes very deep, and it prompted me to think a little bit about using this moment to talk about the two perspectives that I bring to thinking about Laurel. That with all the wonderful stuff that's gone on, the beautiful things that people have done, the tributes, the scrolls, the programs, all of it, she loves it, I love it, I'm very moved by it, I'm very touched by it. But honestly, I've got two perspectives that most people don't have. I met Laurel when she was 18 years old. When she was 18 years old. Last night we happened to get ice cream by Boston College. And there were all these 18-year-olds. And that's no longer us, for sure. And we look at them, they're much, much closer in age to our grandchildren than even to our children, let alone to us. And we look at them and we're kind of marveled. And we looked at people, I remember Laurel said something, there was kind of a nerdy group. There was some very classy group, and there was a nerdy group kind of standing by the ice cream shop. She goes, that was me. And I said, that was me. We were those people. So I have seen Laurel from that moment when she was at beautiful co-ed, walking down the quad in Champaign, Illinois. And I said, you know what? I'm going to be in love with that girl. What's meant to be is going to find a way, because I'm going to marry that girl someday. And as Tricia Yearwood said, and I say as well, that's the key piece. I saw her maturation. Laurel, if you don't know the history, I want to share with you so that you get a piece of it. Laurel grew up in Skokie, Illinois, as part of a warm, loving family. She went off to the University of Illinois with a full scholarship. She did beautifully there. She graduated in the upper 1% of the class, that if you go to the University of Illinois till today, and you go to the library, there is a bronze tablet, and the bronze tablet is there for the upper 1% of every class since 1878. And Laurel Ellen Zar is listed in the class of 1972. She was not only Phi Beta Kappa, she was a star. And she went from there, and I think perhaps a little bit to the chagrin of her family, she decided she wanted to be an English teacher in high school. That's what she wanted to set out to do. And she did that, and she did very, very lovely. And against the better wishes of her family, she decided to marry Arnold Kessler. And then we decided, shortly after I finished my undergraduate, we would come out to New England. And we came out to New England, we took bicycles, we bicycled 650 miles, eventually it broke down, and we moved to the Amherst area, Northampton area, where Laurel started reconnecting with the Judaism that was very deep and close to her at her very beginnings. Her father and her mother deeply committed to the congregation, deeply committed to Jewish life and Jewish observance. Laurel reconnected with that eventually through the synagogue there, B'nai Israel, worked very closely with a number of people, including Julius Lester, his memory should be a blessing. And she became much more confident in the notion of singing and using her gifts in singing. She went to, we had a sabbatical in Israel, one, then we were in fellowships, two, and she saw an ad somewhere, or somebody that in her program said, they're looking for a cantor. They're looking for a cantor in a little town in Sudbury, Mass. And surprisingly, we had used this siddur in our Chavarah. We had used this very siddur for our services in Northampton. So we knew about the congregation, we knew about its gender-neutral language, we were very impressed with it. Laura said, I could never, and enough people pushed her that she said, okay, I'll send in a tape. She sent in a tape, and as it so happened, the rabbi of this congregation, who would sit right here, happened to be in Jerusalem at that time. And you probably heard the story 100 times, but it bears mentioning one more time, is she went and she met with Rabbi Larry Kushner, and I remember I was outside, and she came out and was actually, you could see it in her face. She was very, very interested, very engaged, very moved by it. And I said, so what happened? She said, well, we talked. I talked about my father. I cried. He talked about his father. He cried. Then we talked about, what is it we want for ourselves professionally and from a congregation? And at the end, he said, it's you. You got the job. And then she turned to me and said, but Rabbi, you never heard me sing. He said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I know you. I see you. You're the person. You're the one. And that one has now established things in which there are literally no models anywhere. Literally no models anywhere. She has been a full-time cantor at a Reformed congregation for 31 years. There is no one. It's not like, it's a select group of just 25 women somewhere around the world. There's none. Zero. She is sui generis. There is no one who has achieved this, who has accomplished this. The congregation, of course, has been a partner, but for today, it's about her. It's not about the congregation. That she has been able to achieve this, that's a sacred fragment that has not been replicated, and my hunch is it'll be a long, long, long time before it's ever replicated anywhere. 31 years with a single congregation, to be a clergy member of that congregation. You look around Boston. Are there any women who have a full-time job as cantors? No. Are there any women who have served for 31 years in a congregation? No. You go to Chicago, you go to New York, you go to Los Angeles. Are there other models like this? There's no other models like this. She is the model. She is the model. And if I have one regret, it's not a big deal all around the country that Laurel Zar-Kessler is closing out 31 years. So, honestly, that's my only beef. It's like, how come everyone else doesn't notice how unusual, how remarkable this achievement is? And it's extraordinary achievement. And it's one that I know her, that I've been able to be her partner. It's my privilege. That's obviously the case. But the privilege has been, I think, for all of us to be around this remarkable leader. So I think will be the model for, honestly, not only days, months, years, I think for generations come personally. It's a model of what it means to lead a congregation. It's a model of what it means to be committed to the neshama of every single person in the congregation. Personally, I think it's a model of how women can lead. And I think that in some ways it's underestimated, that she's created a model of women's leadership that people now begin to take for granted. They say, well, that's Laurel. But what she has done is she has made a mark on her community. She has made a mark on her profession. And she certainly made a mark on me. And what I could say that of all the sacred fragments I could gather together, of all of them, there's none that compares. And it's been my privilege to be able to be her partner and to be able to be here. I think short of Laurel, for many years, I thought I was the person who had spent the most Friday nights here hearing Larry Kushner. I have been. I was the one who had the most Friday nights hearing David Thomas. I was. The most Friday nights here hearing Rabbi Josh Brandel. I am. But my greatest privilege is to be spending the most Friday nights, Saturday mornings, and the rest of my life with this wonderful cantor, my wife, my partner, Doral Zar-Kessler. Yes, of course.
Thank you, Arnie.